The sky above New York City tore open at exactly 3:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Dr. Sarah Chen was working late in her lab at Columbia University when every screen in the building went dark. Then came the sound, a deep vibration that made her bones ache and her coffee cup rattle across the desk. She ran to the window and looked up. Massive ships hung in the air like dark mountains. They appeared over every major city on Earth within minutes. Shanghai, London, Moscow, Mumbai, São Paulo. All of them suddenly had alien vessels blocking out the stars. Sarah's phone buzzed once with an emergency alert before it died completely. The power grid failed. Cars stopped in the streets. Planes fell from the sky. The Krath hegemony had arrived. They had done this 47 times before on 47 different worlds. They had refined their invasion protocol to a brutal science. The Krath were not a single species but 6 different alien races working together, united by their desire to expand across the galaxy. They took what they wanted. They destroyed what resisted. They had never failed. The first strike came at dawn. Rods of tungsten steel dropped from orbit, guided by quantum computers that never missed. Military bases across the planet erupted in flames. The Pentagon became a crater. Russia's Northern Fleet headquarters vanished in a flash of light. China's strategic command centers simply ceased to exist. In 40 minutes, Earth's ability to fight back in any organized way was crippled. General Marcus Reeves was in NORAD when the attack began. The mountain shook around him as the reinforced bunker systems activated. He watched the screens as red dots multiplied across the map. Each one a strike, each one thousands of lives gone. His staff worked frantically, trying to establish communications with anyone, anywhere. Most channels were dead. The few that worked carried only screaming and static. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," a young officer said, her voice shaking. "It's from them." The main screen flickered to life. The creature that appeared was tall and thin, with gray skin that seemed to absorb light. Its eyes were large and dark, positioned on the sides of its head. When it spoke, the words came through in perfect English, translated by technology humans could barely imagine. "I am Ambassador Thelkar of the Krath hegemony. Your planet is now under our authority. You have 72 hours to surrender all government functions and submit to processing. If you comply, most of you will survive. If you resist, we will sterilize this world and take what we need from the ashes. You have seen what we can do. Choose wisely." The transmission ended. General Reeves looked at the faces around him. They were waiting for orders, for hope, for something that would make sense of the impossible situation they faced. He had none of those things to give. The second phase of the invasion began 12 hours later. The Krath ships released millions of small drones that spread across the atmosphere. They sprayed something into the air, a red mist that caught the sunlight and made the sky look like it was bleeding. People who breathed it started getting sick within hours. Sarah Chen watched from the basement of a collapsed building where she had taken shelter. She had a medical background and recognized the symptoms immediately. The red mist was a biological weapon, something engineered specifically to attack human physiology. Victims developed terrible fevers. Their skin broke out in crimson lesions. They coughed blood and screamed in agony. Death came in 3 to 5 days, and it was not peaceful. The Krath called it the Crimson Plague. It was designed not just to kill, but to terrify. They wanted survivors to watch their loved ones die in horror. They wanted humanity broken in spirit before the occupation even began. It had worked on every other species they had conquered. The Krath expected it to work on humans too. By the end of the first week, 2.3 billion people were dead. Cities burned. Infrastructure collapsed. Governments tried to organize responses, but with communications destroyed and the plague spreading, there was little they could do. Some people rioted, some prayed. Some simply sat down and waited for death, but some people got angry. Sarah made her way through the ruined streets toward an address she had memorized years ago. Continuity of government facility buried deep underground. She had worked on classified projects before. She knew where the real power would retreat to when the world ended. She traveled by night, avoiding Krath patrols and the dead bodies that lined the roads. It took her 4 days. The facility was hidden beneath an abandoned industrial complex outside of Washington, D.C. Sarah had to prove her identity through retinal scans and bone structure analysis. The security system still worked even though the world above had fallen apart. When the massive blast door finally opened, she found herself in a different world. Inside, the facility buzzed with activity. Scientists, military officers, and government officials worked at stations that glowed with power. General Reeves was there, coordinating with what remained of the military. Leaders from other nations appeared on screens, their faces hard and determined. These were the people who had survived, who had made it to safety while the world burned above them. "Dr. Chen," General Reeves said when he saw her, "we were hoping you would make it. We need your expertise." They brought her to a medical lab where scientists were studying samples of the Crimson Plague. They had managed to capture some of the dispersal drones and were reverse engineering the bioweapon. Sarah looked at the data and felt sick. The plague was brilliant in its cruelty. It targeted mammalian neural pathways in a way that maximized suffering while ensuring eventual death. "Can we cure it?" Reeves asked. Sarah studied the screens for a long moment. "Maybe, but that's not what we should be working on." "What do you mean?" She turned to face him and her expression was cold. "They made this to hurt us. We should make something to hurt them back." The room went quiet. Everyone understood what she was suggesting. For days they had been trying to survive, to endure, to outlast. Sarah was proposing something different. She was proposing revenge. Ambassador Thelkar stood in the command center of the flagship and reviewed reports from the invasion. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Human resistance was scattered and ineffective. The Crimson Plague was spreading faster than expected. In another week, maybe two, the remaining humans would be desperate enough to surrender. "Ambassador, we're detecting unusual activity," one of his officers reported. "Underground facilities are still operational. They appear to be coordinating some kind of research." Thelkar dismissed it with a gesture. "All species try to find a cure to the plague. They always fail, maintain the blockade, and continue dispersal operations." He had seen this before. The defiance would fade. It always did. Soon the humans would beg for mercy, and the Krath would graciously accept their surrender. Then would come the processing, the incorporation into the hegemony, the exploitation of Earth's resources. Standard procedure, simple, clean. But Ambassador Thelkar had made a critical error in judgment. He had assumed humans were like other species the Krath had conquered. He assumed they would break when faced with overwhelming force. He assumed fear and death would make them submit. He was wrong. Deep underground, surrounded by the last remnants of human civilization, General Reeves called a meeting of the surviving world leaders. They appeared on screens, the Prime Minister of the UK broadcasting from under London, the President of Brazil, hidden beneath Brasilia, the Premier of China, speaking from a bunker in the mountains, dozens of others, all that remained of Earth's leadership. "We cannot win using conventional warfare," Reeves said. "Our militaries are destroyed. Our weapons are useless against their technology. If we keep fighting the way we have been, we will lose." "Then what do you suggest?" the Chinese premier asked. Reeves looked at each face on the screens. "We stop fighting like we're trying to win a war. We start fighting like we have nothing left to lose." The vote was unanimous. They called it the Pandora Directive. Every ethical constraint on military research was removed. Every banned weapon, every dark experiment, every nightmare technology that humanity had developed and then locked away, all of it was authorized for use. Sarah Chen stood in her lab and began her work. She would cure the Crimson Plague eventually, but first she would do something else. She would learn how it worked, how it targeted human biology, how it caused such terrible suffering. And then she would make something worse, something designed for Krath biology, something that would make them understand the mistake they had made. They had unleashed hell on Earth. Now humanity would show them what hell really looked like. 3 months after the invasion, Sarah Chen had not slept more than 2 hours in a single stretch. Dark circles surrounded her eyes and her hands trembled constantly from too much caffeine and too little rest. But she was close to something important. The Krath bioweapon was revealing its secrets piece by piece. The underground facility had become a different kind of place. Scientists who had once debated ethics now worked on weapons that would have horrified them before the invasion. Soldiers trained in tactics that violated every rule of warfare humanity had ever written. There were no more debates about right and wrong. There was only survival. "The plague works by attacking specific receptors in mammalian brains," Sarah explained to a room full of researchers. "It triggers pain responses while keeping the victim conscious. Death is inevitable, but the suffering is the point. They designed it to break morale." "Can you reverse it?" someone asked. "I already have," Sarah said. "But that's not what we're going to do with this research." She pulled up a holographic display showing Krath biology. They had obtained samples from a crashed scout ship, and the medical team had spent weeks analyzing them. The Krath were similar enough to humans that the same principles could apply. If we can make them hurt the way they hurt us, Sarah continued, we can make them afraid. General Reeves watched from the back of the room. He had aged 10 years in 3 months. Every day brought new reports of civilian deaths, of resistance fighters killed, of entire towns wiped out by Krath patrols. But slowly something was changing. The resistance was learning. In Chicago, a group of survivors had managed to hijack a Krath supply transport. They studied how it worked, how the controls responded, how the energy systems functioned. Then they crashed it into a Krath processing center and killed 300 alien soldiers. It was the first significant victory humanity had scored. The Krath response was immediate and brutal. They leveled 6 city blocks and killed 20,000 people in retaliation. But they had revealed something important. They could be hurt. They could bleed. They could die. News of the Chicago attack spread through the underground networks. Resistance cells began coordinating, sharing information, learning from each success and each failure. A group in Tokyo discovered that Krath infantry had a weak point in their armor near the neck. Fighters in Berlin learned that Krath night vision could be overwhelmed by specific frequencies of light. In Mumbai, survivors found that Krath communication devices could be hacked if you had the right equipment. Each piece of information was small, but together, they represented something the Krath had not anticipated. Humanity was adapting. Ambassador Thelkar reviewed casualty reports in his ready room. The numbers were higher than expected. Not dramatically so, but enough to be concerning. Krath soldiers were dying in ground operations at a rate that had never occurred in previous conquests. The humans are using unconventional tactics, his military commander explained. They hide among civilians. They sacrifice themselves in suicide attacks. They fight in ways that disregard their own survival. Desperation, Thelkar said dismissively. It will pass. Increase patrols and intensify the plague dispersal. But the military commander looked uncertain. Ambassador, perhaps we should consider that these humans are different from previous species we have encountered. Thelkar's eyes narrowed. Different how? They seem to become more dangerous the more we hurt them. The ambassador considered this for a moment, then dismissed it. Fear makes all species desperate. Continue operations as planned. Deep in the underground facility, Sarah made her breakthrough. She had successfully modified the Crimson Plague to target Krath physiology. The new version, she called it Strain Omega, was more terrible than the original. It attacked pain receptors first, amplifying every sensation. Victims would feel their bodies breaking down at the cellular level. Death would take weeks, not days, and every moment would be agony. She stared at the test results and felt nothing. No horror at what she had created. No moral doubt. The part of her that would have hesitated died the same day her daughter did, coughing blood in a crowded hospital while Sarah held her hand and could do nothing. It's ready, she told General Reeves. He looked at the data and nodded slowly. Can we manufacture it in large quantities? We already are. We have labs in 7 different locations, all producing it. We can weaponize it within weeks. Then we proceed. But Sarah hesitated. General, once we use this, there's no going back. We'll be doing exactly what they did to us. Reeves met her eyes. They came to our home, Dr. Chen. They killed our children. They tried to break us. Now we show them what happens when you push humans too far. The resistance cells received new orders. They were to capture Krath soldiers alive whenever possible and transport them to collection points. The captured aliens were taken to interrogation facilities where human scientists studied them, learned their language, understood their culture, and then humanity began psychological warfare. A Krath patrol in London disappeared. Their last transmission showed them being overwhelmed by human fighters. 2 days later, the Krath command received a video transmission. It showed the captured soldiers in a laboratory, strapped to tables. Human doctors stood around them with instruments. The video was 40 minutes long. Every second was broadcast on Krath military frequencies. The screaming was constant. The video was a lie. The Krath soldiers had been captured, interrogated, and imprisoned, but not tortured. But the Krath didn't know that. All they knew was that their soldiers were being subjected to the same kinds of experiments they performed on conquered species. More videos followed. Some were real. Most were fabricated. But they all served the same purpose, to make the Krath afraid. Krath ground forces became paranoid. They fired on shadows. They refused to investigate certain areas where humans might be hiding. Morale began to deteriorate. For the first time in their history of conquest, Krath soldiers started to desert. Ambassador Thelkar demanded explanations. His military commanders had none to give. The human resistance was growing stronger, not weaker. Casualties were mounting. Entire units were going missing. And worst of all, the Krath High Council was asking questions. In Moscow, a resistance cell led by a former Spetsnaz operator named Yuri Volkov executed a daring raid. They infiltrated a Krath communication hub and planted a virus in the system. The virus didn't destroy anything. Instead, it created false reports, messages that made it seem like different Krath species were planning betrayals, that resources were being hoarded, that command staff were incompetent. The Krath hegemony was a coalition of 6 species. They worked together because it benefited them all. But trust was thin. As false reports spread through their networks, that trust began to crack. The 6 species started watching each other suspiciously. Resources were diverted. Cooperation decreased. Humanity had found a weakness and was exploiting it ruthlessly. Sarah stood in front of a map of Earth marked with red zones where the Crimson Plague had been deployed. Soon those zones would turn blue, areas where Strain Omega was ready for dispersal. She had teams preparing delivery systems, modified Krath drones that would spread the bioweapon across alien-occupied territories. "We'll hit them simultaneously on all fronts," she explained to the command staff. "They won't have time to develop countermeasures before it spreads through their forces." "What about the Krath civilians?" someone asked. "The ones in the ships, the support staff who aren't soldiers?" The room went quiet. It was a question everyone had been avoiding. Sarah's voice was cold when she answered. "They didn't care about our civilians. We won't care about theirs." General Reeves stood. "I want everyone in this room to understand what we're about to do. We're not just fighting back. We're becoming something worse than what attacked us. Some of you may not be able to live with that. If you can't leave now, no one will judge you." No one left. Outside the facility, in a tunnel that led to the surface, a young soldier named James Martinez sat with his rifle across his knees. He was 19 years old. Before the invasion, he had been studying engineering. Now he was part of a unit that specialized in ambushing Krath patrols. He had killed his first alien 3 weeks ago. It had been easier than he expected. Now he had killed 11. He kept count on his rifle stock carved with a knife. The other members of his unit did the same. They rarely talked about what they did. They just did it. Kill the aliens. Take their equipment. Learn from it. Kill more aliens. It was simple and brutal and effective. James wondered sometimes if he would even recognize himself when this was over. If there would be an over, but mostly he didn't think. Thinking meant remembering. Remembering his family in Phoenix all dead in the first week. Remembering what normal life felt like. Remembering that he used to be afraid of violence. Now violence was all he had left. In orbit above Earth, Ambassador Thelkar received a priority transmission from the Hegemony High Council. They wanted a status update on the conquest. He prepared his report carefully, minimizing the difficulties, emphasizing the progress. Earth would fall soon, he assured them. Human resistance was fierce, but ultimately futile. He believed what he was saying. The Krath had superior technology, superior numbers, superior experience. 6 months had passed since the Krath arrived. Earth was a wounded planet, scarred by bombardment and plague. But the Krath were beginning to realize they had made a terrible mistake. They had expected humanity to break. Instead, humanity had become something they had never encountered before. The first Krath ship went dark over the Atlantic Ocean. Communications simply stopped. When the Krath sent another vessel to investigate, they found a dead hulk drifting in orbit. The ship's hull was intact. Life support showed green. But when they boarded, they found only bodies. Every Krath on board was dead, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. The boarding team reported strange movement in the walls, in the air itself. Then their communications cut out too. That ship went dark as well. Sarah Chen watched the reports with satisfaction. The nanomachines were working perfectly. They called them Reaper swarms, microscopic machines that could self-replicate using any available matter. They were designed to infiltrate craft vessels through the air circulation systems, invisible and unstoppable. The swarms didn't just kill. They were programmed to be terrifying. They would cause minor system failures first. Lights flickering, strange sounds in the walls, reports of movement in empty corridors. The craft crews would grow paranoid, afraid. Then the swarms would strike, shutting down life support in specific sections, sealing doors, hunting the crew like prey. Every ship that docked with an infected vessel became infected too. The swarms spread through the craft fleet like a disease. Within 3 weeks, 47 craft vessels were dead hulks orbiting Earth, filled with machines that waited patiently for more victims. The craft stopped all docking operations. They quarantined infected ships and destroyed them with weapons fire. But they were too late. The swarms had already spread to their primary command carriers. The infection was inside their fleet. Ambassador Thelkar stood in the command center of his flagship and tried to understand what was happening. The humans had somehow developed nanotechnology that exceeded anything in the craft database. They were primitives who had barely achieved spaceflight, yet they had created machines that terrified his soldiers. How is this possible? He demanded. His science officer looked exhausted. They reversed engineered our technology and combined it with their own. They're advancing at an unprecedented rate. We estimate they've made 50 years of technological progress in 6 months. And the plague we deployed against them? The officer's expression darkened. They've stopped dying from it. They developed a cure 3 months ago. And there are reports of something else, a new disease spreading through our ground forces. Thelkar felt cold. Show me. The screens displayed footage from a craft medical facility. Soldiers lay in beds, their skin covered in lesions that glowed with an eerie blue light. They were screaming. The medical staff stood helplessly by. Nothing they tried could stop the progression. The afflicted craft took weeks to die, and every moment was agony. It's a modified version of the Crimson Plague, the officer explained. They changed it to target our biology. They made it worse than what we used on them. The room fell silent. Every craft present understood the implications. Humanity had taken their weapon and improved it. They had turned it back on its creators. On Earth's surface, resistance fighters moved through the ruins of what had once been Beijing. They wore captured craft armor and carried modified alien weapons. Their leader was a woman named Lin Wei, a former police officer who had lost everything in the invasion. Her team had tracked a craft patrol to a collapsed building. They set up an ambush, waiting in the shadows. When the patrol passed, they didn't attack immediately. Instead, they activated speakers hidden in the rubble. The speakers played recordings of craft screaming, of their distress calls, of their final transmissions before the Reaper swarms killed them. The patrol stopped, listening. Fear rippled through their ranks. They raised their weapons, pointing at shadows. And that's when Lin Wei's team struck. The battle was short and brutal. The resistance fighters used tactics the craft had never seen. They appeared from multiple directions, always moving, never staying still. They targeted the craft weak points that humanity had learned through months of trial and error. In 90 seconds, the entire patrol was dead. Lin Wei didn't feel anything as she watched the bodies. She had stopped feeling much of anything after the invasion. There was only the mission. Kill craft, gather intelligence, survive, repeat. Her radio crackled. Eagle Eye to Phoenix team. We have movement on the north side. Looks like reinforcements coming. Copy that, Lin Wei replied. Set charges and fall back. We're not here to hold ground. That was another lesson humanity had learned. Don't fight the craft head on. Hit them fast, hurt them badly, and disappear before they can respond. Make them afraid to patrol. Make them afraid to leave their fortifications. Make them afraid of the dark. Make them afraid of humans. In his underground facility, General Reeves coordinated resistance operations across the globe. The war room screen showed dozens of simultaneous actions. A raid in London, an ambush in Tokyo, a bombing in Moscow. Every day, craft casualties increased. Every day, humanity grew stronger, but there was a cost. A psychologist named Dr. Michael Torres approached Reeves after a briefing. General, I need to talk to you about the soldiers. What about them? They're showing signs of severe psychological trauma. The things we're asking them to do, the torture, the biological weapons, the complete disregard for any rules of warfare. It's destroying them mentally. Reeves looked at the doctor for a long moment. We're all being destroyed, doctor. The question is whether we'll be destroyed trying to win, or destroyed doing nothing. I know which one I choose. But at what point do we become worse than the Krath? We crossed that point months ago, Reeves said quietly. But we're still here. They wanted to wipe us out. Instead, we're showing them what humanity is capable of when you push us to the edge. Dr. Torres had no response to that. He walked away, leaving Reeves alone with his thoughts and his terrible choices. The Krath High Council held an emergency session. Holographic projections of the 6 species leaders gathered in a virtual space. Ambassador Thelkar stood before them, trying to explain the situation on Earth. The humans are more resourceful than anticipated, he said carefully. They have proven difficult to pacify. Difficult? One of the council members hissed. You've lost 60 ships, 3,000 ground troops, and this plague they've created is spreading to our occupied territories on other worlds. Another council member spoke. We are considering deploying the Stellar Incinerator. The room went silent. The Stellar Incinerator was a weapon the Krath had used only once before, against a species that had refused to surrender even when facing extinction. It could ignite a planet's atmosphere, burning everything on the surface. It was a weapon of last resort. Give me more time, Thelkar pleaded. We can still— You have failed, the council leader interrupted. We are authorizing the deployment. Earth will burn. We will take what we need from the ashes. The transmission ended. Thelkar stood alone in his ready room, staring at the planet below. He had wanted this conquest to be clean, efficient, a demonstration of Krath superiority. Instead, it had become a nightmare, and now his people were going to destroy Earth entirely, rather than admit defeat. He wondered if the humans would find a way to fight back against that too. Based on the last 6 months, he wouldn't bet against them. Sarah Chen received the intelligence report at 3 in the morning. A Krath scientist had defected, downloaded classified information and transmitted it to human resistance fighters before being killed. The data was clear. The Krath were bringing a massive weapon into Earth's orbit. They called it the Stellar Incinerator. She ran to General Reeves's office. He was awake, always awake now. She showed him the data. How long do we have? He asked. 96 hours? Maybe less. Reeves studied the information. The weapon was being positioned at Lagrange Point 2, behind the moon. It would take days to charge, but once activated, it would set Earth's atmosphere on fire. Everything would die. All the resistance, all the fighting, all the sacrifices, it would all be meaningless. Can we stop it? He asked. Sarah pulled up another screen. Maybe, look at this. The Krath fleet is controlled by a central quantum network. Every ship, every weapon, every system is connected. If we could infiltrate their flagship and upload a virus into that network, we could take control of their fleet. Or destroy it, Sarah said. Either way, the Stellar Incinerator wouldn't fire. Reeves called an emergency meeting. Scientists, soldiers, strategists, everyone who could contribute gathered in the war room. They looked at the problem from every angle. The Krath flagship was heavily defended, surrounded by escort vessels, protected by shields that humanity couldn't penetrate. But there was one way in. We used their own technology against them, Sarah explained. We have captured Krath biosamples. We can use gene therapy to temporarily alter human physiology, make our people appear as Krath on their bioscanners. It won't last long, maybe a few hours, but it might be enough. How many people would this mission require? Reeves asked. 60, maybe more. It's a one-way trip. Even if they succeed, they won't be coming back. The modified transport ship approached the Krath flagship in the darkness of space. Inside, 60 humans breathed slowly through filters that would help mask their biosignatures. The genetic modifications made their bodies appear alien on scanners, but it wouldn't fool direct observation. They needed to move fast. James Martinez checked his weapon for the 100th time. Around him, the other volunteers sat in silence. Some prayed. Some stared at nothing. One woman wrote a letter she would never send. They all knew they were already dead. The question was how much damage they could do before the end. Approaching Docking Bay 7, the pilot announced. She was one of them, would die with them. Bioscanners are showing green. They think we're a returning patrol. The ship shuddered as docking clamps engaged. Through the viewport, James could see the interior of the Krath flagship, a massive vessel that held more firepower than everything humanity had possessed before the invasion. Somewhere inside was the quantum network that controlled the entire fleet. Somewhere inside was their target. The airlock opened. Krath soldiers waited on the other side, weapons lowered but ready. The humans walked out in formation. mimicking the movements they had observed in countless recordings of Krath patrols. No one spoke. Speaking would give them away instantly. They made it 50 meters before alarms started screaming. "Contact!" someone shouted as Krath weapons fire lit up the corridor. The humans scattered, returning fire, all pretense abandoned. The mission had been compromised, but they were already inside. That was something. James ran with his squad toward the command levels. Krath defenders appeared at every intersection. The fighting was brutal and close. Humans died in the first exchange, 7 gone in seconds. But they kept pushing forward, because stopping meant failure and failure meant extinction. Kate Morrison led the second squad through maintenance tunnels. They had studied the flagship's layout for days, memorizing every route, every junction. The tunnels were narrow and dark, perfect for ambushes. Her squad killed 3 Krath patrols before reaching the primary power junctions. "Plant the charges," she ordered. "If we can't reach the quantum core, we'll blow the power grid and cripple them that way." Her team worked quickly, attaching explosives to critical systems. More alarms sounded. The Krath knew intruders were aboard now. Heavy security teams would be converging on their position. James's squad fought through another defensive position. They were down to 12 people now. Bodies lay behind them, human and Krath mixed together in death. The floor was slick with blood. The air smelled like burning metal and fear. "There," someone shouted. Ahead was a massive door marked with Krath symbols. According to their intelligence, the quantum network core was beyond that door. They had made it. Somehow, impossibly, they had reached their target. They blasted the door open. Inside was a chamber filled with crystalline structures that pulsed with light, the physical manifestation of the quantum network that controlled the Krath fleet. And standing between them and the core were 30 Krath elite guards in full combat armor. The firefight that followed was chaos. James saw 3 people die in the first seconds. He fired until his weapon overheated, then grabbed a Krath rifle from a fallen enemy and kept shooting. Beside him, a man named Carlos took a blast to the chest but kept fighting long enough to throw a grenade before collapsing. The humans pushed forward step by bloody step. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the Krath didn't understand. They had nothing left to lose. Every human in that room knew they were dead. The only question was whether they would complete the mission first. When the last Krath guard fell, only 13 humans remained standing. James among them. They stumbled toward the quantum core, wounded and exhausted. A woman named Sarah Park, not the scientist, a different Sarah, a programmer from Seattle, pulled out a data spike loaded with the virus. "Cover me," she gasped, bleeding from a wound in her shoulder. She reached the core and jammed the spike into an access port. The virus began uploading. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. The door behind them exploded inward. More Krath soldiers poured through. "Hold them!" James screamed. The survivors formed a line, firing everything they had. People died. The line collapsed. But Sarah Park kept working, her fingers flying over alien controls as the virus spread through the network. Ambassador Thelkar felt his flagship shudder. Alarms screamed on every level. His officers shouted reports, all of them bad. "Humans inside the ship!" Security teams engaged. Casualties mounting. And now something was wrong with the quantum network. "Cut all connections to the core," he ordered. "Too late, Ambassador," his science officer said, horror in his voice. "The virus is already in the system. It's spreading to every ship in the fleet. It's rewriting command protocols." The main screen went dark. Then it came back on, but the display was wrong. Krath ships were targeting each other. Weapons systems were activating without authorization. The entire fleet was turning on itself. "Stop it!" Thelkar screamed. "Shut everything down!" But there was no stopping it. The virus had been designed by humans who had spent months studying Krath systems. It knew every weakness, every vulnerability. It convinced ship AI that friendly vessels were enemies. It disabled safety protocols. It turned the most powerful fleet in Krath history into a death trap. Sarah Park watched the upload complete. She had succeeded. Behind her, the last of her team fell. James Martinez took a blast that tore through his chest. He collapsed, looking up at the ceiling, thinking about his family, thinking that at least his death meant something. Kate Morrison's squad activated their charges all at once. Power grids throughout the flagship exploded. Life support failed in dozens of sections. The ship began a slow, tumbling spin, and outside, in the black of space, the Krath fleet began to tear itself apart. Ships that had been in formation for months turned and fired on each other. Weapons meant to destroy Earth were used on Krath vessels instead. Capital ships and escorts exchanged devastating volleys. Shields failed. Hulls breached. Thousands of Krath died in the opening minutes. The stellar incinerator, still positioned at Lagrange Point 2, received false targeting data from the compromised network. Its massive weapon systems powered up, but instead of aiming at Earth, they locked onto the Krath flagship. Ambassador Thelkar had just enough time to understand what was happening before the beam fired. The flagship evaporated in a flash of light brighter than the sun. The stellar incinerator's discharge was so powerful, it created a temporary new star in Earth's sky. On the surface, people who had been preparing for death looked up and saw hope instead. The explosion created a shockwave that rippled through the Krath fleet. Ships already damaged by the friendly fire crashed into each other. The quantum network, now completely corrupted, sent increasingly erratic commands. Some ships tried to flee. Others shut down completely. The most advanced fleet the Krath had ever assembled destroyed itself in 6 hours. When it was over, 87% of the invasion force was gone. Debris rained down on Earth for 3 days, burning metal and alien bodies falling through the atmosphere like meteor showers. The sky was filled with fire, but this time it was Krath ships burning, not human cities. General Reeves stood in the command center and watched the destruction. None of the 60 volunteers had survived. They had given everything, and in return, they had saved humanity. He would make sure their names were remembered forever. The surviving Krath ships retreated beyond Jupiter, their command structure shattered, their confidence broken. They had come to conquer. They had expected surrender. Instead, they had been taught a lesson in human determination. But humanity wasn't done teaching. A transmission went out from Earth, broadcast on all Krath frequencies. It showed General Reeves standing in front of a human flag. His face was hard, his eyes cold. "This is General Marcus Reeves of the Human Resistance. Your fleet is destroyed. Your weapon is gone. You came to our world expecting us to break. You were wrong. We do not break. We do not surrender, and we do not forget." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The Krath who survive this day will carry a message back to your hegemony. You have awakened something you should have left alone. We were a peaceful species until you made us warriors. We were content with our single world until you showed us the stars. And now that you have taught us what we are capable of, we will not stop until every one of you understands the mistake you made." The transmission ended. Across Earth, in underground bunkers and ruined cities, humans heard those words and felt something they hadn't felt in 7 months. Not hope, something darker than that. Determination, purpose, a hunger for vengeance. The Krath had unleashed hell on Earth. Now Earth was ready to return the favor. Ambassador Thelkar was dead, vaporized with his flagship, but one of his senior officers survived, commanding a destroyer that had escaped the worst of the cascade. Commander Vexlar looked at the wreckage of his fleet and felt something Krath rarely experienced: fear. The humans had done this. Primitives who should have died in the first week had instead destroyed the most powerful force the hegemony could muster. They had turned the Krath's own weapons against them. They had sacrificed 60 of their people to kill thousands. Commander Vexalar's retreat was broadcast across all Krath channels. He offered unconditional surrender, reparations, anything humanity wanted. The surviving Krath fleet transmitted their submission on every frequency, begging for mercy. General Reeves received the message in the war room. Around him, the command staff waited for his response. Some hoped he would accept. The war was over. They had won. It was time to rebuild, but Reeves remembered the first week. He remembered 2.3 billion dead. He remembered children dying from the Crimson Plague while their parents could do nothing but watch. He remembered cities burning. He remembered what the Krath had planned for humanity: processing, slavery, extinction. His response was simple and final: no. The word echoed through the room. One of his officers spoke up. "Sir, they're surrendering." "The threat is over." Reeves turned to face them. His expression was hard as stone. "They came to our home. They killed our people. They tried to break us. Now they run away and expect mercy?" He shook his head. "They're going to learn that you don't get to walk away after what they did. You don't get to say sorry and go home. He opened a channel to the retreating Krath fleet. His message was broadcast so every ship could hear. "This is General Marcus Reeves. Your surrender is not accepted. You came to Earth, you brought war. You showed us the stars and taught us to hate. Now we're coming for you. Run as far as you want. Hide wherever you can. We will find you. And when we do, you will understand what you created." The transmission ended. Across Earth, the response was immediate. Captured Krath ships were being retrofitted with human crews. Scientists who had spent months reverse engineering alien technology now had entire vessels to study. The quantum slip drives that had brought the Krath to Earth would carry humanity across the stars. Sarah Chen led the research effort. She had the Krath navigation databases, the star charts showing every world the hegemony controlled. She knew where the Krath homeworld was located. She knew the routes they would take to retreat. And she had something special planned for them. Strain Omega was being loaded onto modified Krath dispersal drones. Thousands of them, each carrying enough bioweapon to infect an entire planet. They would follow the retreating fleet, spreading plague to every world the Krath touched. It would be slow, painful, exactly what they deserved. "We'll be no better than them," Dr. Michael Torres said when he saw the plans. "We were never better than them," Sarah replied coldly. "We just hadn't been pushed far enough to prove it." The first human fleet left Earth orbit 3 weeks after the failed invasion. 20 ships, all of them captured Krath vessels with human crews. They were patchwork creations, held together with improvised repairs and desperation. But they worked. They could fly between stars. That was enough. James Martinez had died aboard the flagship, but his younger brother Miguel was alive. Miguel joined the crew of what humans were calling the Vengeance, a destroyer that had been captured intact. He was 18 years old, an engineer who had learned Krath systems by dissecting dead alien technology. The fleet followed the Krath retreat path. They found abandoned outposts, damaged ships, evidence of panic. The mighty hegemony was running scared. Good, let them run. Humanity would follow. They reached the first Krath colony world 2 months later. It was a mining operation. 3 million Krath civilians working in orbital facilities. When the human fleet arrived, the colonists broadcast desperate pleas for mercy. General Reeves, commanding from the Vengeance, opened a channel. "You are Krath. You are part of the hegemony that invaded Earth. That makes you our enemy." "We had no part in the invasion," the colony administrator pleaded. "We are civilians, workers, please." "There were 2.3 billion civilians on Earth," Reeves interrupted. "Your hegemony didn't care. Why should we?" The dispersal drones were launched. Strain Omega spread through the colony within hours. The human fleet watched as the bioweapon did its work, watched as Krath civilians died in agony, watched without flinching. Miguel Martinez stood on the bridge and saw the colony die. He felt nothing. That worried him sometimes. He used to be a person who felt things: happiness, sadness, guilt. Now there was only the mission. Kill Krath, move to the next target, repeat. Was this what his brother James had felt? Was this what they had all become? The news of the colony's destruction reached the Krath High Council within days. The 6 species that made up the hegemony held an emergency session. Panic was spreading through their territory. The humans were not accepting surrender. They were hunting Krath across the stars like vengeful spirits. "We must appeal to the other galactic civilizations," one council member suggested. "Request intervention. The humans are committing genocide. And what will those civilizations say?" Another replied bitterly. "That we started it? That we invaded their world first? That we used bioweapons on their population? No one will help us. They will watch and learn from our mistake." The council leader, an ancient Krath named Ixthar, spoke quietly. "We have awakened a predator. We thought we were hunting prey, but we were wrong. Humanity is something we have never encountered before, a species that becomes more dangerous the more you hurt it. Then what do we do?" Ixthar looked at the others. "We prepare for war. Totalva. Because the humans will not stop until we are extinct, or they are. But the Krath were already broken. Their fleet was decimated. Their command structure was in chaos. The 6 species that formed the hegemony were beginning to turn on each other, each blaming the others for the disaster. The humans exploited every crack, every weakness. Transmissions were intercepted and altered to create mistrust. False intelligence was planted. Resources meant for defense were diverted by hacked logistics networks. Humanity had learned from the best teachers, the Krath, themselves, and now those lessons were being used to destroy them. Sarah Chen, coordinated the psychological warfare campaign from Earth. She had teams dedicated to studying Krath culture, finding fears, exploiting insecurities. Every transmission from the human fleet was calculated to maximize terror. Make them afraid to sleep, she told her team. Make them afraid to trust each other. Make them afraid of the dark. The campaign worked. Krath worlds reported mass panic. Soldiers deserted. Civilians rioted. The hegemony's control over its territory was collapsing faster than any military defeat could achieve. The human fleet reached Krath Prime, the homeworld of the hegemony, 4 months after leaving Earth. By then, they had destroyed or infected a dozen colony worlds. The Krath population was dying in the billions, and still humanity came. Krath Prime was a beautiful world, blue and green like Earth, home to 7 billion Krath. It was heavily defended with orbital platforms and defensive fleets. But those defenses had been designed to repel traditional invasion. They weren't prepared for what humanity brought. The human fleet didn't attack. Instead, they positioned themselves in orbit and broadcast a message. Sarah Chen appeared on the screens. She looked older now, worn by months of war and terrible decisions, but her voice was steady. People of Krath Prime, your hegemony came to Earth 7 months ago. They killed 2.3 billion humans with bioweapons. They burned our cities. They tried to break us. Now you will experience what they gave us. The dispersal drones were launched, thousands of them spreading strain Omega across the planet's atmosphere. The plague would reach every city, every town, every settlement. It would kill slowly and painfully, just like the Crimson Plague had killed on Earth. You have 30 days, Sarah continued. 30 days to feel what we felt, to watch your loved ones die, to understand the mistake your hegemony made. At the end of 30 days, we will provide the cure, but only if you meet our conditions. The transmission ended. Across Krath Prime, the plague began its work. Hospitals filled. Medical systems collapsed. The death toll climbed into the millions, then tens of millions. The Krath High Council broadcast desperate appeals for mercy. Humanity ignored them all. General Reeves watched from orbit and felt nothing. This was justice. This was what the Krath had earned. Let them suffer. Let them beg. Let them understand what it meant to face extinction. On Earth, protests began. Some humans argued they had gone too far, that genocide was wrong regardless of who started the war. Others said the Krath deserved everything they got. The debate raged in the underground cities and ruined streets. Dr. Michael Torres confronted General Reeves during one of his rare visits back to Earth. We're killing billions of civilians, children. How is this different from what they did to us? It's not different, Reeves replied. That's the point. They wanted to show us hell. We're showing them something worse. And what happens when this is over? What kind of species will we be? Reeves looked at him with cold eyes. The kind that survives. On the 27th day, with 4 billion Krath dead and their civilization collapsing, the High Council capitulated. They broadcast their acceptance of humanity's terms on all channels. The terms were brutal. Complete dismantling of the Krath military, every ship destroyed or given to humanity. Reparations in the form of technology and resources. Krath scientists and engineers would serve humanity for 5 generations, helping rebuild Earth. The other 5 species of the hegemony must abandon the Krath or face the same fate.